So these days, often the media is highly polarized and gives they cherry pick particular information and give very emotive expressions, and then in the audience, step by step, they gradually build the thought. I really don't like Daniel Andrews, or I really do like Daniel Andrews, or climate change isn't as serious, or climate. So through words, we establish a reality. We see it in adversaries when two people are having an argument, and then one comes to you and gives their description of what's going on, and you get on their side, and then the other person comes and gives a totally different description, and you get on their side through the power of words, establishing our reality. And you see it in political propaganda. So, for example, authoritarian regimes where there's only a single channel of characterization of reality. There's always the praise for the ruling party and the leader, and it's a rewriting of history, and it's those words are a way of establishing a reality amongst that population. So words are powerful things for establishing, and thoughts. And our thoughts are very convincing. So they seem to depict a reality that exists from its own side. It's out there. So the world seems to be jumping out towards us. Everything we see and everything we know about these things seems to be coming from the object. And it appears to be objective. The way we perceive the world seems to be that's the way the world is. And it appears to be sort of set in stone. The world appears to be substantial, out there, sort of existing from its own side, very heavy, very serious, and so on. And based on that, we get a bit of a entrenched view about, for example, self and other, very heavy view of I, fixed view of others, and view of self and other, and sense of us and them. So the Buddha said, the way we take reality, one aspect of it is correct, and one aspect is incorrect. So with regards to everything in your world, including yourself, your I, your me, and everyone you know, and your house and your life and everything, one part of the way we know that is correct, and one part is totally incorrect, according to the Buddha and according to the wisdom lineage, all the way down through Nagarjuna, down to Geshe-Acharya to Tenloden. It's an extraordinary proposition. So, and the incorrect part, the small mistake with regards to how things exist, is a small mistake can have very big consequences. So if we get on the wrong aircraft or get on the wrong train, one small mistake has very big consequence. And we continuously beginning on this plane to samsara, or round and round samsara. So even during COVID lockdown, the Samsara Express is still running and everyone's still jumping on it. So, so we see things as existing from their own side, out there, independently existing. And we spend all our life trying to satisfy this way we see things. For example, the I, the me, the you, the substantial I, me, myself. We spend our whole life trying to, as a slave to that. So we we're continuously trying to satisfy what the I demands. And, all of our grasping, all of our shouting, all of our fighting, all the killing that goes on in the world, and dying for particular beliefs, all arising from this basic mistake we make about who we are and how the world exists, how we exist, how the world exists. So these teachings on special insight and the nature of reality, they're not an abstract philosophizing that you see in sometimes you hear university professors philosophizing, and it can sound very sort of nothing to do with their personal lives, very sort of, so it doesn't seem to have much bearing on their personal reality. So the point that the Buddha was making about these teachings on the nature of reality is it's right in there. This is the heart of all of our suffering, all the difficulties, all the emotional ups and downs I've experienced, you've experienced, all unhappiness is all arising from this basic misunderstanding. So it's an interesting subject. That's an extraordinary proposition the Buddha's making. And through understanding emptiness, then we can see, even gaining some intellectual understanding of emptiness, we can see that there is actually a possibility of overcoming suffering. So suffering seems so overwhelming and always there. Like we might think we're always going to suffer when we get sick, when we get old, when we die, when people we love die, we're always going to suffer. Our minds are going up and down. Suffering is just part of life, and it's always going to be. And there doesn't seem to be a solution. Whereas there's a verse, I think, in the Perfection of Patience in Yesha's Path to Enlightenment that says, to a bodhisattva who sees selflessness, by whom, when, and how is he cut? As he sees all things as illusions, he will remain patient. So seeing emptiness, the emptiness will take away all this heaviness, externality of the world and others, and take away all the heaviness and suffering that is associated with a sense of I, how I see myself, and how that drives my life. So if we gain some understanding of emptiness, and particularly a realization of emptiness, it will actually completely change our perception of everything, and it will change our responses to pretty much everything. So very similarly to in a dream, you're very involved in a dream, you're running away, you're terrified, something's chasing you, and then you realize it's a dream, it's just an appearance to mind. And then there's a huge relief. So similarly, the realization of the nature of reality is said to be that sort of quantum leap in understanding about the world. Okay, so we go to page 834, and this talks on the way of establishing the view of reality. So it's broken down into 6 parts here. The means of engaging the nature of reality, the 4 tenets on the view of emptiness, the principle to be refuted, the method for refuting self-grasping ignorance, 2 divisions of emptiness and 7 examples of emptiness. So the means for engaging the nature of reality on 835 is, Geshe here talks about how Lama Tsongkhapa had a direct vision of from Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom. And Manjushri told him that renunciation, compassion, and bodhicitta, they can't completely remove our delusions. And so Lord Tsongkhapa asked, well, how do you completely remove delusions? And he said 3 things. You need to pray to your guru and deity as non-dual. So we make that connection with enlightenment and receive blessings. Then we need to purify our continuum. We need to purify our mind of obstacles that prevent us, cloud our mind. So through things like prostration and practicing the 4 opponent powers, through regret and so on, we purify all these obstructions. And then through accumulating merit. And we can accumulate merit through lots of different ways, through rejoicing in others' virtue, rejoicing in our own virtue, through guru yoga, through anything to do with helping others, looking after others, compassion, love, bodhicitta, and so on. We can amass merit and condition our mind, this sort of internal ecosystem, with this positive energy of merit, similar to nurturing the soil in the garden with compost and fertilizer. So it's just ripe, ready for realizations to occur. So we need to do those 3 things. And Geshe sometimes on the commentary of that, he'd include purification and accumulation of merit as number 2. And the 3rd thing would be you do the actual practice. So when you're trying to understand impermanence, you need to bring your mind to the methods to understand impermanence. If you want to understand emptiness, you have to do the practice. So Geshe would sometimes say that. So Path to Enlightenment, it also talks about how the previous 5 perfections are similar to blind. So a mundane bodhisattva, one who hasn't realized emptiness, not a super mundane bodhisattva who has, but a mundane bodhisattva, his or her 5 perfections of generosity, ethics, patience, joyous effort, and concentration, those practices are still contaminated with delusions. And Geshe said, the Path to Enlightenment, and therefore this prevents development and getting to the city of enlightenment. So with wisdom, then we need the wisdom to discern what to practice, what not to practice, what's virtuous, what's not, what's useful, in your own mind when you're meditating, what's useful and what's not. And particularly the wisdom perceiving emptiness. So I'll quote from an oral teaching from Geshe at this point. He quoted Lord Tsongkhapa. He said, Lord Tsongkhapa said, a person who hasn't the wisdom perceiving emptiness, then he or she for 1 million years can practice bodhicitta, the conventional mind of enlightenment, or practice renunciation. And then it's impossible to remove the root cause of samsara. Therefore, he said, it's very important recognizing dependent arising and emptiness. Everything is emptiness or dependent arising. For example, short and long, good and bad, north and south. Why are they empty? As they are empty of inherent existence, empty of true existence, and empty of independent existence. As they are nominally existent, conventionally existent, or dependently existent. Why are they dependent arisings? There's no short without long, no long without short, therefore dependent arising and emptiness. So we need to approach emptiness. Or also earlier in the path to enlightenment, there's that verse that the Buddha can't wash away our sins with water. He can't take sufferings with his hand. He can't take our sufferings. And he can't transfer his realizations to others. Only through showing the truth of suchness can we be released. So we need this, we need to understand emptiness. So Path to Enlightenment also mentions a special insight on the nature of phenomena, directly opposes all delusions and is a permanent end to suffering. So, and we gain special insight through study and analysis. So we need to respect our own intelligence. Some spiritual traditions say you don't need to analyze, you don't need to study, you need to become non-conceptual and so on. Lord Tsongkhapa made it very, very clear that the path to enlightenment, path to liberation, it's essential we use our intelligence and we analyze. And so it's called ultimate analysis. To find emptiness, we need to engage in what's called ultimate analysis, where we're trying to find how the object exists, what's its mode of existence, where is this object? And that's so we need to respect our analytical capability. So I'll quote Lord Tsongkhapa on volume 3 of his great Exposition. He said, an indispensable prerequisite for insight is to use the wisdom gained through study and reflection to develop knowledge of reality. For without a decisive view of how things exist, you cannot develop insight that knows the real nature, emptiness. Moreover, if you do not rely upon the treatises by authoritative trailblazers commenting on the Buddha's thought, you are like a blind person headed towards danger without a guide. Hence, you must rely on accurate commentaries of the Buddha's thought. So we're very fortunate to have Geshe-la's teaching here for 30 years and his extraordinary authoritative texts on the path to enlightenment and so on. So then we look at page 836, and this describes the 4 tenets of the view of emptiness. So I was lucky enough to be at East Melbourne in 1988. Geshe taught the 4 tenets every Saturday. For quite a few months, he taught the 4 schools of Buddhist thought. And it was wonderful, really fantastic way to spend Saturdays trying to get our head around these 4 schools. So the 4 schools of philosophical thought, they're not temporal progression of schools that happens through Buddhist history, like the first school, then it graduated, thought was refined, and a few hundred years later, second school, and so on. The 4 schools are a grouping of different philosophies or tenets into basically so many different masters presented different views on the nature of reality. And they were grouped into 4 distinct schools of thought. So that's what the 4 schools mean. And they all they represent a lessening grasp of grasping or solidifying of reality. So the 4 schools, gradually as you progress them, the thought gets more and more subtle. So it's easy as Tibetan involved, those of us involved in Tibetan tradition, mostly the Tibetan traditions, the highest schools called consequence, or the Prasangika school of thought, Prasangika Madhyamaka, so the middle way consequence school. And it's easy to think of these other schools are pretty, they're a bit gross or unsubtle or unrefined thought. But we should bear in mind that all of the four schools are more subtle than the way we take reality. So our innate way of grasping at the world and seeing the world jump out towards us from its own side, established from its own side, is more gross than any of these four schools. So the four schools are very useful for us to step through, to break down our own innate grasping, gradually refine our understanding of reality. So the progression is similar to the progression from classical physics to the sort of quantum world today, whereas, a couple of hundred years ago in classical physics, there was an external world. It was objectively existent, nothing to do with mind, and it could all be perfectly described. This objective existence out there, very sort of graspable, solid external world. And then through, not that I know next to nothing about quantum physics, but there was one, John Wheeler, I think, one quantum physicist, who said, in a strange way, the world is, what was it, the word he used? It was not interactive, it was more established by mind. It was, I've forgotten the word he used. But in quantum physics, there's they can see the way that we think about things and the constructs we use and the instruments we use to measure the things is the cause of us establishing that reality. And the classic example is looking for light it's called a double slit experiment, where if you look for light in distinct particles, you see particles. If you look for light as a continuous wave, you see waves, depending on the instrument you're using. So it's more informed with regards to the input of mind into reality. Okay, so the four schools are the Great Exposition School, Geshe-lism here, then known as Sanskrit Vaibhashika. Sutra school, Sautrantika. The mind-only school is known as the Chittamatran or Yogacharans, and the middle way school, Madhyamaka. And middle way school, there's two divisions. There's the consequence and the autonomists. So I'll just give a tiny bit on each school to give you some idea. So the Great Exposition School, which is, from Tibetan view, it's the most, a more basic view of reality. And it was taught the Buddha taught all of these views for different people. So the Great Exposition, if you see a flower or rose, I say that's a conventional truth, because you can take that rose and pull it apart, and the consciousness, your awareness of the rose disappears. As soon as you've broken it into parts, there's no rose there. So it's a conventional truth, it's merely imputed. But the ultimate truth is that there's, within the parts of the rose, there's these, what they call directionally partless particles, tiny, tiny particles that can't be broken down any further. And they're known as ultimate truth. They're what's the sort of building blocks of reality. And the other thing they present is temporally partless moments of consciousness. So tiny, tiny moments of consciousness that can't be broken down anymore. So from their viewpoint, that's They're the ultimate truth. They're the building. They're what you can actually pin down as being real, and everything else, the world we see, is an aggregation of those bits. So the second school, the Sutra school, is a bit more subtle, because it starts to look at the relationship between our states of mind and the objects we apprehend. So it makes this major division between what's called specifically characterized objects and generally characterized objects. So specifically characterized objects are regarded as ultimate truths. So they're things that are impermanent, they're products, and they functioning things. So for example, a rose is, from Sutra school, is an ultimate truth. It functions, it can establish the next part of the rose, the seeds and rose hips and so on, but it can also establish the consciousness, the eye consciousness perceiving the rose. It's a cause of that consciousness. So from Sutra school, they're truly existent. The rose is truly existent, exists from its own side. But then the other type of phenomena is called generally characterized phenomena. So these are thoughts and concepts, and they're not, they're permanent, they're not produced, and they regard them as being falsely existent. So the reason they regard thoughts or generic images as being permanent, it means they're not changing moment by moment by moment like the roses. And the reason for that is, if you have a concept of, for example, say you're 20 years old and through your life you've seen different fires, so you have an image of what is a fire, then the generic image is a negation of non-fire. So they're saying, basically, you're saying everything outside of this outline is not fire. So when I'm thinking fire, it's just a generic image. It's not, it's an exclusion of non-fire. So I won't go into that anymore, but that's how. So the difference between direct perception, like your eye consciousness, seeing a rose, and your thought, thinking about the rose. So often you'll see something, then it will get merged with the thought. It said the thought is mistaken because it thinks that's an actual rose. Where in actuality it's a mental image. So with regards to, you can talk about the appearing object. In the world, the rose is the referent object, and the appearing object is what's appearing to your mind, whether it's your eyesight seeing the rose or your thought of the rose. That's the appearing object. It's appearing to consciousness. So with regards to specifically characterized phenomena, the referent object, the actual rose, and the appearing object are unmistaken. And from Sutra school, they're actually the same. You're with direct perception, you're getting at reality, you're getting at the rose. But for the generally characterized rose, the generic image, the mental thought rose, you're actually you're mistaken. You're not accessing the actual rose directly. So the referent object and the appearing object are different. So that's the Sutra school. They start examining minds, the two main types of mind, thought and direct perception, and the objects of those minds, the world. So then we get to the Mahayana schools, and the next one is the mind-only school. And the mind-only school says there's no external rose at all. There is no world, and there is no rose out in the world. There is no out in the world, external to mind. So external objects are formed that are not dependent to mind. And from the mind-only school, that doesn't exist. So they say everything, all of our reality, the object we perceive and the consciousness perceiving it, has been established by latencies or seeds. And when one seed ripens, the consciousness to see a rose ripens, and the rose appears, the object and the consciousness simultaneously arise. They're one entity. And it's quite hard to refute mind only, because all of us, our whole world, our whole existence is only been known through the medium of mind. Like you think your life is your mother, your father, your children, your work, your house you live in, your car, and so on. That's my life. But your life is made up completely through your cognition of all those things, your awareness of all those things. That's your life. So it's hard to say there's anything outside of that awareness, because the only way we've known things is through awareness. But the mind-only school does get a bit challenged when you're asked, how come there's common experiences? For example, if there's 100,000 people in the MCG and someone drives a red Ute-in, it's a Ford, it's 1991, it's got a bit of rust in the corner. How come 100,000 people all see that same object pretty much in the same way? And for mind-only school, they have to say there's a similar, the same latency ripening, generating that consciousness. So from Prasangika's view, there are external objects. That doesn't make sense. So I'll quote what Geshe said about Chittamatra. He said, blue and eye consciousness, perceiving blue, are the same entity. Ocean and consciousness are the same entity. Therefore, everything is dependent to mind. Our happiness, our suffering, our desire, our hatred are all dependent to mind. Our enemies, our friends, higher rebirth, realizations of renunciation, bodhicitta and wisdom, perceiving emptiness, are all dependent to mind. From Guru Yoga to complete enlightenment is all dependent to mind. Therefore, the mind-only school. So an interesting question is, when you're doing a meditation and you're visualizing your guru or deity or Shakyamuni Buddha in front of you, and you're visualizing this bright, radiant, maybe with a radiance of 1,000,000 suns, trying to get this sense of enlightenment. It's interesting to ask how much of that is actually your own mind. And it's a pretty wonderful thing, really. You're generating this aspect of enlightenment. And it's actually your mind is generating that extraordinary thing. So, yeah, how wonderful is that? That's your mind's generating. Anyway, so that's the mind-only school. Everything is mind, according to the Chittamatrans, the mind-only. Middle Way Autonomy School. So then next is the Middle Way School. And they refute things existing truly. True existence. And the Middle Way School is broken into the Autonomy School and the Consequence School. So this starts to get very challenging or subtle. The ultimate truth of the Autonomy School is a rose is empty of true existence, but it is inherently existent and it's findable. So this distinguishes it from Prasangika, the consequence school. So things, conventional truth, like a rose or this temple, they exist by their own way of their own nature. They naturally exist, they conventionally exist, but they don't ultimately exist. And they exist through their own mode of subsistence, but in dependence on appearing to mind. So they're saying they have their own, they're saying two parts. The world has its own mode of subsistence, but in the same breath they're saying it depends on mind. So they're saying if you're saying a rose has no roseness within it, or a car doesn't even have an atom of a car in it, then you can't posit conventional truth. So, yeah. Whereas the middle way consequence school is unique, and this is pretty much all the four Tibetan schools primarily assert middle way consequence school. And they say everything is empty of inherent existence. Everything is empty of intrinsic existence and true existence. And that you can't find one atom of anything within that thing. So within a car, if you look for an atom of car, from that point of view, elusive and ungraspable, conventional reality, when you're using ultimate analysis from consequence school viewpoint, you can't find the thing. If you're using conventional analysis, then you can get to know things. You can understand how a car works and so on and so on. But if you're looking for the mode of existence, the ultimate analysis, then you can't find even one atom of the thing. All you find is emptiness. And so the middle way school is unique in that all the other schools of philosophy, so something within the object is the actual object. There's a findable thing there. And all of the other schools, they feel they have to say that because otherwise they feel you can't posit conventional reality. You can't posit cause and effect. You can't posit karma. If there's not something findable there, some nature of car within car, some nature of rose within rose. Whereas the extraordinary subtleness of the consequence school is the Buddha's view and Nagarjuna's view, and so on. Chandrakoti delineated the consequence school, is that even within this complete emptiness and nothingness, you can still posit the totality of a functioning world. And in actual fact, that's the only way it can function. So I want to read 4 verses from Geshe's Great Treasury of Mahamudra from Nagarjuna. So Nagarjuna founded the Middle Way School, and then it was further refined by like Aryadeva and particularly Chandrakirti, Buddhapalita, to establish the consequence school. But on page 217 of the Great Treasury of Mahamudra, Geshe says, in chapter 24 of his fundamental wisdom of the middle way, Nagarjuna maintains, where emptiness is established, all becomes established. Where emptiness is not established, nothing can be established. And also, if all this were not empty, there would be no arising nor disintegration. You would thus entail the fault that the 4 noble truths be non-existent. In Geshe's commentary, he says the premise of Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom on the middle way is set out in the opening 2 verses, which state, whatever arises in dependent relationship is not obstructed not born, not annihilation, not eternalism, not coming, not going, not different, not identical. Prostrations to the complete Buddha, the teacher of peace, pacifying elaborations, he who expounds all that is sacred. So, yeah, what did I want to say? So yeah, that's a pretty unique thing about the consequence school, that you can posit the totality of reality, and the only way things can actually exist is because of emptiness. Without emptiness, there would be no function. Things couldn't change, things couldn't appear, evolve, and so on. There couldn't be cause and result. So it's an extremely subtle view, and we try to get to that view from our gross, the way we see the world, our innate grasping, self-grasping ignorance. One way to get to that view is to go through those four schools and think about the four school concepts and refine our view of emptiness. But the path to enlightenment doesn't really go into detail on the four schools. It's just presenting the consequence school viewpoint. So that's the approach we can take. We can go straight for emptiness and emptiness of inherent existence and try to gain some understanding about what that's being talked about. So I want to quote the Geshe here talks about the lineage on page 836 in Path to Enlightenment. He says, in the descent into Lanka Sutra, Shakyamuni gave a very clear prediction of the coming of Nagarjuna. He said that Nagarjuna would teach the correct view of the nature of phenomena and would cause that doctrine to flourish in all directions. The Buddha predicted that Nagarjuna's explanation of emptiness would accord exactly with his own teachings on that subject. Nagarjuna founded the Middle Way School, upholding the view which avoids the two extremes of inherent existence and non-existence by propounding a middle way between these two exaggerations of the nature of reality. His followers, notably Buddhapalita, Aryadeva and Chandrakirti, carried on this lineage of teachings and further qualified it to establish the Middle Way Consequence School to distinguish the view from that of the Middle Way Autonomists. Both Atisha and Tsongkhapa emphasized that Chandrakirti's interpretation of Nagarjuna's Middle Way correctly conveyed the meaning of the Buddha's Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Only by following this correct meaning of emptiness is it possible to attain liberation or enlightenment. The Consequences School teaching on emptiness is very deep, subtle, and profound. Even an intelligent person with great wisdom will have difficulty understanding this view unless he practices the stages of the path to enlightenment for a long time and greatly purifies the obstructions to accumulated negative karma. The following explanations on cultivating special insight is given in relation to the Middle Way Consequence School teachings on emptiness. So we shouldn't let that put us off. I think a lot of Buddhist students feel they approach emptiness and feel this is too hard or too challenging because it's starting to look at who am I? Where is this I that I've spent my whole life protecting? And it's been the hub of my universe. Everything is in relation to I. And so it's easy to get a little bit, I want this I to feel substantial. I'm continuously building on this I. And these teachings say that's the root of suffering. That's a pathway only to suffering. So it's easy to veer away from the emptiness teachings, thinking it's too hard, I'm not intellectual, or I'm not analytical, or I don't want to damages this sense of who I am. But through the emptiness teachings, we can actually gain a much extraordinarily expanded view of the I, all the way to enlightenment, like the Buddha's wisdom truth body, like the I of the Buddha, as the Buddha's mind is sort of limitless, endless, vast. That is the I of the Buddha. So we're very limited with our sense of who we are. So emptiness is laid out very, very clearly and simply in this path to enlightenment. And so we need to just keep trying little bit by little bit by little bit. And all the four schools, they do assert that they all assert that they tread the middle way. So, for example, the first school, the Vaibhashikas, where they say only these tiny little particles of matter or tiny particles of consciousness really exist. They say that that's the reason, because they assert those, they say we haven't fallen to the extreme of nihilism, where nothing exists. And we haven't fallen to the extreme of internalism or permanence, exaggeration of reality, because we assert the rose is a conventional truth. It's only an aggregation of these paths. So all four schools say they assert the middle way. But according to Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, Buddhapalita, Aryadeva, Lord Tsongkhapa, Pratisha, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Geshe-Acharya Thupten Lodin, the actual middle way is presented with this consequence school. And that's what we need to look at. And so that's what we'll be looking at next week. We'll start at the principle to be refuted, which is really at the core of understanding emptiness, is to understand what's the opposite of emptiness. How do I see the world? How do I see myself? How do I see others? What is this mistake I'm making? And it's really hard to see because it's part of everything we've known, everything it's been there. It's been a filter for everything we know. So we'll probably wrap it up there and say the dedication prayers. I'm not sure what camera I'm supposed to be looking at. Oh, it's this one, is it? Sorry. I keep looking up there thinking there's a camera on a giant pole. So I'm thinking I'm looking down all the time, but yeah. Okay. So we're on the final prayer of the graduated path. And because we might just say it in English due to the time. So, page 31. By the two collections vast as space, amassed with effort for a long time, may I become a chief of conquerors, a guide for all beings whose mind's eye is blinded by ignorance. Also in all lives will not yet come to that. May Manjushri favour me with his compassion, finding the supreme path, complete with all stages of the teachings. May I please the conquerors by practicing well, by my precise understanding of the essential points of the path, with skillful means drawn along by strong compassion, and by dispelling the mental darkness of beings. May I uphold the conqueror's teaching for a long time, for the supreme precious teaching has not spread, also where it has spread but become degenerate, with a mind deeply moved by great compassion, I make clear this treasure of benefit and bliss. The stages of the path, excellently established by the marvelous deeds of the conquerors and their sons, give glory to the minds of those aspiring for liberation. May the conquerors' deeds be long preserved. May all humans and non-humans who remove the obstructions, and establish conditions favourable to cultivating the excellent path. Never be parted for all of their lifetimes from the purest of paths which the Buddhas have praised. When someone makes effort to practice properly the 10 points of conduct of the Supreme Vehicle, may he always be assisted by the mighty protectors, and may oceans of good fortune spread out, reaching all. Then page 34, special dedication. Whatever white virtues we have thus created, we dedicate as causes, enabling us to uphold the holy Dharma of Scripture and realization, and to fulfill without exception the prayers and deeds of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 3 times. By the power of this merit, in all our lives may we never be parted from the 4 wheels of the Mahayana, and may we complete the journey on the paths of renunciation, bodhicitta, pure view, and the 2 stages. By this virtue, may all beings complete the collections of wisdom and merit, and attain the 2 holy bodies arisen from wisdom and merit. May a precious superior mind of enlightenment be generated in those who have not yet generated it, and not decrease in those who have developed it, but increase continuously. So, thanks very much, everyone. Hope lockdown's treating you okay. And so we'll be on more emptiness next week. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to send them in, and I'll phone a friend. I'm on mute. Oh, okay. Which one's that? Microphone, is it? Microphone. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
This is the best explanation.